At this point, the unmade Gambit movie is remembered less for its hero and more for the fact that it never left development hell. Channing Tatum was attached to star as the Cajun mutant as far back as 2014, with Fox announcing and re-announcing a carousel of release dates that kept slipping further away. Joshua Zedamer, the gentleman without a wiki page who wrote the 2014 RoboCop remake and more recently created the TV series Say Nothing, once took his swing at the Gambit movie. A leaked copy of his second draft gives us a glimpse of what might have been. One of those missed release dates was October 2016, which lines up with this draft, dated August 28, 2015. But delays quickly piled up as directors came and went, rewrites dragged on, and Fox reshuffled its X-Men slate. What was once pitched as a slick, roguish heist caper slowly collapsed under studio uncertainty, leaving Gambit stuck in limbo until Disney's acquisition of Fox killed the project very dead. The script opens with a cheeky framing device. Gambit is on trial, and his charm immediately sabotages the proceedings. The women on the jury swoon so hard they have to be excused, a gag that might have made certain fanfic communities very happy. From there, the story jumps back to 1984, with Gambit already in his 30s, a timeline tweak designed to mesh with the continuity of the First Class soft reboot. As the story progresses, we'll have references to both Days of Future Past and Apocalypse, which was actually being written at the same time. The post-credit tease in Apocalypse was in fact intended as a lead-in for this movie. Zedamer's draft makes an effort to pull from Gambit's comic book backstory and supporting cast, though that material has always been tricky to wrangle. Fabian Nicieza gave it an earnest go in the late 90s Gambit solo series, and the character's animated origin episode in the Fox animated series is still remembered fondly. Honestly though, that single glimpse of Gambit's family in the show may have been all the audience ever really needed. One of the script's cooler beats comes early on, when Gambit casually brushes his fingers against a glass of water, or even a Bible, and instantly trips the federal marshal's mutant detection alarms. From there, the story rewinds to 1955. We meet Luc LeBeau, a black master thief masquerading as a lowly servant inside a white debutante ball. He catches the suspicious eye of young Marianne Boudreau before vanishing into a pantry. The twist is that a 6-year-old Gambit actually beats Luc to the prize. Luc scrambles up a levee expecting to confront a rival thief, only to find this scrappy kid instead. Luc's own crew of ragtag boys, including Henry, a character introduced in the initial Gambit miniseries, soon take Gambit in as an adopted cousin. And in a rare subversion of X-Men parental tropes, Luc doesn't recoil when he realizes the boy is a mutant. Instead, the hard-edged thief softens, making him one of the few adults in Remy's life to greet his powers with something other than fear. Luc is clearly meant as a stand-in for the comics Jean-Luc Lebeau, the patriarch who raised Remy after he was stolen from the hospital at birth. Race swapping is nothing new for the Fox movies, but reimagining Jean-Luc as black and making the Thieves Guild a family of black men does carry some racial implications that the writer likely hadn't considered. Down by the Mississippi, the script takes a detour into horror-tinged territory. Young Gambit wanders past an industrial space inside a seemingly pleasant community known as Storyville. He catches the stare of a girl peering through a window, her black eyes and jagged bone protrusions instantly recognizable to fans as a nod to one-time X-Men Marrow. Cutting to a few years later, we meet a teenage Belladonna Boudreau, just 13, reading tarot cards for a pair of tourists. The script has fun with her, describing her not as a phony fortune teller, but as a psychic who's actually psychic. Bella slips into the role of ally, bailing Remy out of trouble with the police and shepherding him into a far less wholesome setting, a brothel. It's here the film provides the origin of Gambit's signature trench coat. After one client shrugs out of his brown duster, Remy snatches it on the run, the oversized garment comically hanging off his skinny frame. The scene doubles as an introduction to Bella's family power structure. Her mother, Marianne Boudreau, is soon introduced as a New Orleans crime matriarch, flanked by muscle-dressed as high-class thugs. Her son Julian, 18 and intolerably smug, appears as Remy's family meets Belladonna's. Both feel each is a bad influence on the other. By the way, there seems to be some continuity discrepancies in the script. Julian is introduced as Belladonna's brother, which matches the comic book continuity, but he's referred to as her cousin later in the screenplay. The screenplay also gives surprising weight to another Boudreaux family member, Vincent, a new creation for the screenplay and a continual foil for Gambit. In the script, Belladonna hides her mutant status from her wealthy, image-conscious family, which is consistent with the studio's efforts to center all of the X-Men films around the mutant issue in some way, contrasting with the comics, which never concerned itself with drawing the larger issue of mutant discrimination into the New Orleans family feud storylines. As this story progresses, we'll see even more mutant-centric plot points rear their head. Interestingly, the script doesn't yet frame the LeBeaus as an official thieves guild, but instead shows Luke floating the idea of forming one to balance the scales against the Boudreaux clan. Their joining together brings us the script's first major action sequence, a joint family bank robbery spearheaded by a teenage Gambit. It's the first time we'll see Gambit throw a card in battle, but in this scene it's tarot cards instead of playing cards. Those will come later in the story. During this joint family bank heist, Remy's impulsiveness forces Bella to reveal her mutant powers in front of everyone. Her family reacts with fear and outrage, and things escalate fast. Her hot-headed brother Julian grabs Bella by the throat and shoves her against the wall, prompting Gambit to intervene. Where the comics stage their conflict as a stylized fencing duel, this version trades dueling swords for bullets. Julian reaches for a gun amid the chaos of the robbery, only for Gambit to kill him with a charged tarot card. The violence doesn't stop there. In the crossfire, Luke LeBeau is shot through the back and killed. Remy, reeling, doesn't even know who pulled the trigger. That revelation is saved for later in the story, when it's revealed that Belladonna's mother Marianne was the one who fired the fatal shot. This tragedy splinters the families beyond repair and marks the end of Gambit's New Orleans chapter. The narrative then jumps forward a decade. Gambit resurfaces in Paris, living the life of a charming reprobate, drinking, gambling, and sleeping his way through Europe, all bankrolled by his unmatched thieving skills. We take a sharp turn into deep-cut comic territory with the introduction of Jacob Gavin, better known to fans as Courier. Created by Fabian Nicieza for Deadpool's initial 1993 miniseries, Courier's a shapeshifter who had a recurring role in Gambit's solo series, even morphing into a beautiful woman for a memorable story arc, which this draft cheekily recreates. Here he's a slick emissary for Mr. Sinister, though the script just calls him Nathaniel Essex. The description of Essex leaves no doubt, though: pale skin, a diamond scar carved into his forehead, and a mad scientist background. Unfortunately, Zedamer doesn't nail Sinister's speech pattern, dropping the formal patois for the everyday patter you might expect out of a Lethal Weapon villain. Honestly, when Essex does finally reveal himself, he doesn't come across as particularly smart. Essex wants to hire Gambit for a job, with a little test first: robbing the Louvre. The Louvre heist also serves as a showcase for Gambit's gear. His iconic staff is introduced, described as two police batons he snaps together, and we discover Gambit's grown into that trench coat, which he's now lined with pricey fur. The Louvre heist provides the strongest evidence that Zedamer has actually read Gambit comics, and not merely Wikipedia summaries. Zedamer has Gambit mutter the Nicieza chestnut of "time to make the donuts," a reference only Nicieza fans or Dunkin' Donut enthusiasts will catch. Following the Louvre sequence, Courier lays out the big job. Essex will pay Gambit $40 million to steal something from Belladonna's family. This version of Essex has a surprisingly prosaic motivation, as it turns out, selling drugs that temporarily grant mutant powers to humans. Again, it's a Fox movie, so mutancy must be a major plot point. He monologues about a world where, if we all have a little mutant blood in our veins, there is no more us and them. No more stigma. No more hate. Mutations safe as apple pie. From there, the story coasts into the X-Men film continuity. New Orleans is underwater, a nod to X-Men Apocalypse, where Magneto disrupted the Earth's magnetic field, which has flooded the levees. Gambit dives into the disgusting, murky waters of his old neighborhood, digging through the wreckage of his past. In one waterlogged box, he finds a photograph of his real parents, an understated beat meant to tease the mystery of his origins. The Boudreaux family didn't waste the crisis caused by Magneto, They looted everything in sight, including a mysterious steel trunk belonging to none other than Nathaniel Essex. Gambit assembles a team and hatches a scheme to steal it back. The antagonists keep piling up. Enter Richter, aged up to 35 and reinvented as a mutant assassin, part of a squad of mutant killers on Marion Boudreaux's payroll. For comic fans, this one stings. Richter is already a well-established character with a detailed backstory throughout the X titles, so why strip him down into a generic guild enforcer when there are plenty of other mutant henchmen to draw from? Another strange deviation would be the Vanisher twins. Bald, sleazy, and sporting wispy mustaches, these middle-aged crooks are introduced as a team of scumbags. Except there are actually 3 of them. This isn't that great of a joke, and there isn't a compelling reason to reimagine classic villain the Vanisher as triplets. The Assassin's Guild roster gets some deep continuity cuts and some bizarre makeovers. Fifilet maintains his bioelectric powers, but is race-swapped and reimagined as a tattooed Chinese mutant in geisha makeup, peeling his shrimp with grotesque nails. He's introduced with a darkly comic beat where the assassins offer an automatic shrimp peeler as his payment. Another curious addition is Alice, a telepath working for Essex who may or may not come from the comics, as no obvious analog jumps out. She pops up long enough to help escalate the guild drama, only to be unceremoniously tossed out a window to her death after a brawl with Belladonna. The third act hinges on the Thieves' Ball, essentially a crime syndicate auction. Marion Boudreaux plans to sell off Essex's stolen trunk there, providing Gambit a classic heist setup. The ball itself is a who's who of X-Men underworld factions. Even the Hand is name-dropped, tying it to the second Wolverine film. Recruiting mutants for the heist, Gambit stumbles across Dani Moonstar, for no discernible reason other than she's a mutant with name recognition, even though you can't reconcile this appearance with the New Mutants movie. Another arbitrary character selection is Jamie Madrox, the Multiple Man, and his partner in crime Mask, misspelled Mesk, in the draft. Awkwardly introduced as a meek kid in a hoodie. Mask shows off his powers by grotesquely reshaping Madrox's face during a bank robbery, something that doesn't add much to the story, but at least confirms this is the walking body horror created by Chris Claremont. So what exactly is in the trunk Essex claims is stuffed with mutant drugs? Cowering inside is a little mutant girl actually. This is Sarah, but fans will recognize her immediately as Marrow. And if we're paying close attention, we'll realize something stranger. She's the same girl Gambit saw a decade earlier in Storyville. The problem is, she's still 10 years old. Sarah hasn't aged a day. Connecting Gambit and Marrow is a nod to a controversial 1997 retcon in the comics. In an effort to pay off a long-running mystery, Marvel editorial tried to tie Gambit and Marrow together by claiming he had rescued her as a child during the Mutant Massacre. The idea never really went anywhere, and most fans hated it. So it's curious to see the screenplay dusting it off the connection, planting it right here in the middle of Gambit's origin. And there's no real reason for this character to be Marrow, as she's defined far more by newly invented healing powers than her excessive bone growths. Bella, of course, had no idea her mother has been trafficking in mutant children, which motivates her to side with Gambit. Essex wants Sarah back, believing a pharmaceutical product derived from her powers will make him incredibly wealthy. In her pocket, Sarah carries a photograph of her parents. The picture is nearly identical to the one Gambit once found of his own parents. The symmetry gnaws at him. When she leads him deeper into Storyville, the script gets surreal. At the center of Essex's compound are neat rows of pastel houses, like something out of Pleasantville. Sarah likes it here. To her, it's home. But it's easy to see Sarah's been raised inside a cult. Storyville's mutant residents donate their blood willingly to Essex, believing they're serving a higher purpose. Gambit pushes deeper and discovers a maternity ward filled with mutant infants. He watches in horror as Essex euthanizes one of the newborns, dismissing it as unviable. In his private lab, Essex calmly explains his philosophy. Children are grown, harvested, and discarded. Progress demands sacrifice. Before the fight, Essex gives Gambit a tragic backstory. At first, it sounds familiar, incorporating some elements from his comic's origin, the tale of a sickly child he wanted to cure. Essex admits he experimented on his own son. When the boy's blood proved useless, Essex abandoned him on the streets to see if he could adapt and survive. That boy grew into Remy LeBeau. Gambit's entire life, every scrape and scar, has been part of Essex's experiment. And every fan of the comic book and animated series is collectively muttering, "Ah, come on." When Gambit explodes in anger at the revelation, his power signature isn't the usual purplish red. It's now blue, echoing Essex's own energy signature. The more enraged he gets, the more he resembles the man who created him. But thanks to some armed goons, all of the blue explosions in the world aren't enough for Gambit to defeat Essex. In another inane plot twist, instead of killing Gambit, Essex turns him over to the authorities, which brings the screenplay full circle back to the courtroom. Gambit is put on trial for the attempted murder of Nathaniel Essex, and he's sentenced to 50 years in the Louisiana State Penitentiary. There's one final twist. The trial itself? Completely staged. It was a setup orchestrated by the LeBeaus to give Gambit a way out. Every participant was a trained actor, playing their parts to perfection. The Gambit in the defendant's seat wasn't Gambit at all. It was Mystique, hired by the LeBeaus to impersonate him. While Essex was distracted in court, the LeBeaus and Belladonna used the opportunity to ransack his empire and reveal the full scope of his schemes. In the end, Essex is stripped of his authority, exposed for what he truly is, while Gambit and his allies celebrate their victory. And one of the reporters covering the story just happens to be named Chris Claremont. It's a strangely anticlimactic send-off for Essex, publicly humiliated and thwarted, with no secret plot beyond wanting Gambit prosecuted. One can't help but wonder, why not just kill him or, in true sinister fashion, experiment on him instead? Overall, the script does manage to nail certain elements of Gambit's personality, slipping in some surprisingly deep-cut references to the comics, and it delivers a few fun sequences along the way. You could write a fantastic Gambit movie without ever touching the whole Thieves and Assassins Guild's backstory, so in one sense it's admirable that Zedimer chose to weave in so much of the source material. The problem is, that same commitment makes the script's deviations from the lore all the more irritating. It's one thing to see obscure characters from the 90s show up in the plot, but it's another thing entirely to watch it all lead into a tired finale that recasts Gambit as Sinister's long-lost son, while reducing one of the X-Men's most iconic villains to an off-model goof. There are moments toward the end that feel less like a Gambit showcase and more like Fox emptying the toy box. Instead of a focused arc around Remy, Belladonna, and the guilds, we get telepaths fist-fighting, Sinister as Big Pharma, and random mutants pulled in seemingly because their names were lying around and used. Frustratingly, there are numerous superpowered characters from the guild mythology, such as it is, who could have fit into these roles. And given Sinister's prominence in the story, it would have been justifiable to place a few of his flunkies from the Marauders or Nasty Boys in some of these roles. Overlooking those complaints of a one-time X-Book completist, this draft is a pretty entertaining action/heist story. It's better than most of the later Fox films, and in retrospect, it's surprising the movie languished in development hell during the height of Channing Tatum's popularity. Like a deck of mismatched cards, this script never quite comes together, but it still manages to land a few winning hands.